Hello, my name is Ben Tibbetts, and I'm a pianist and composer working in the area of Austin, Texas. And for most of last year, I was doing these regular updates every month on what I was up to personally and professionally. And this was just kind of a way for me to keep in touch with people and to let anybody who's interested in my work know what's new, what they might be interested in seeing on my website or elsewhere on the internet. I've decided to experiment with this format a little bit. And today, rather than doing like a straightforward update, I figured what I would do is try and kind of talk shop a little bit more and get more into the details of what I'm doing professionally, some of the lessons I've learned from my experience, and both from the things that have gone well and the things that I wished I'd done a little differently. And just in general, to gear this more towards people who want to try doing the sort of thing I'm doing, which is to say they want to try to be a freelance musician, which is in some ways quite difficult. It requires not just music skills, although it does require that. It requires just a lot of, I think, probably business skills, which I'm not the best at, but I can talk about that, and I will talk about that in this video, but also networking and all sorts of other little things. And I want to get into that in this video and talk about how I've learned and applied that kind of knowledge in the past month or two. So I'm recording this from a new music studio, a physical studio for the first time. This is a music studio that I'm renting in Round Rock, Texas. And I'm here on Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And the rest of the time, Tuesdays through the weekends, the studio is occupied by my friend Keith Allegretti, who I've mentioned in past videos. Keith is a great musician, and like I say, he's a friend of mine. And the studio is being managed by my other friend, Graham Yates, who is kind of a sub-landlord for a number of studios in this location called Timbrel Music Studios. And this is, and when Graham approached me about this idea, I was super thrilled because it gave me an opportunity to get an affordable space where I could work and teach. And it also provided an atmosphere of being surrounded by musicians and student musicians, aspiring musicians, which I love. It's always it helps me focus to be around people that are trying to do what I'm doing. So Graham is actually teaching right now in the room down there. And they're still looking for more teachers / musicians to fill the other two rooms here. So if you're interested, go check out the website for Timbrel Music Studios, which is on the screen, and come be a part of our team. I think that would be really fun. So let's talk about the advantages of doing this, of getting an office. The first really clear advantage for me was getting some separation between my work and my home life. Before doing this, as you might have seen in my last updates, I was recording from home because I was working from home when I was working on anything on my computer. And I was also practicing mostly at home. And the disadvantage of doing this is it's hard to relax, frankly, because you're always potentially in a position to be doing some work, which really translates for me personally into always being in a position of either feeling guilty that I'm relaxing or working but not working in a very focused way. So I have found it helpful in the past as well as recently to get some separation between those spaces. And for an exploration of this, I would recommend a video by CGP Grey called Spaceship U. And this is a really good video about among other things, the advantages of finding different spaces for different activities. Because your brain, my brain anyway, forms a close association between different physical spaces and different mental spaces. And I've already found that it's easier for me to get into a focused working professional mindset here at the office, and then to get into a more relaxed mindset when I'm at home by creating that physical separation. The disadvantage of doing this in my case is for financial reasons. I've split the time during the week with Keith, and there is a certain disadvantage here because it means that I have to really schedule what I'm going to be doing during my work time. If I don't do that, I might miss a deadline because I wasn't kind of counting my days carefully. Or I might, find myself in a position where I have to work really late at night, which already did happen a couple of times. But so this is a disadvantage, definitely. But I think even this can be turned to an advantage because it really just forces me to be more focused with my time, and to it incentivizes me also to not procrastinate. When I'm in this office, I'm working. I'm not checking Facebook or doing things like that. The other disadvantage I would say is sound bleed. I think the Zoom mic that I'm using to record this is filtering it out, but there is some music coming from this wall right now as I say this, from the lesson that's being taught over there. This is a disadvantage if I'm recording something. For reasons that I'll get into in this video, it's not a severe disadvantage because I'm usually recording straight into the computer from digital/MIDI output. But it would be a more severe disadvantage if I was recording more like this, if I was just relying on a microphone and a live output. In that case, I would have to schedule my recording sessions either for early in the morning or late at night or something, and that is a disadvantage. These studios, I've been thinking I might put up some soundproofing or something, but thus far it hasn't been too big a deal to have a little bit of sound bleed between the rooms. I've realized recently that I prefer teaching with two pianos as opposed to one. Most music lessons, most instruments can be taught through clear demonstration. If you're taking a trumpet lesson, there's not going to be only one trumpet in the room. There's going to be at least two, the teachers and the students. You're not going to be trading the trumpet back and forth. And, but that's not the case with piano lessons. Most piano lessons that I've taught have been in a room where there's one piano, and I have to have the student occupy the center, and I take either the low or the high end of the piano when I want to demonstrate. And the problem here is that when I'm demonstrating, it's in a different range and it sounds different. It's not completely clear what I'm trying to show because what I'm doing sounds different. And this is a liability for me because my teaching style relies pretty heavily on demonstration. I just find that if I don't demonstrate, I get tripped up over my words more, and it's more efficient, it's more effective for me personally to demonstrate things. So having two pianos in this office has been very helpful for that. I sit over here with a separate bench, student sits here, and when I want to show something, I can show it exactly the way I want them to play it. This is not the only space I have that's like this. There are also situations at Armstrong Community Music School, where I also teach, for example, that have two pianos set up, and I can demonstrate in that way. I would recommend this for other piano teachers. If you can, get a space with two pianos. It's at a minimum, it doesn't hurt to have another piano. And if you're like me, it will help the efficacy of your demonstrations. This past December, I did a Christmas concert in which I was playing four hands music with Graham, premiering some of his music, his arrangements for a Christmas Eve concert at his church. This was awesome. I love doing four hands music. And it's a very unique kind of genre. And I've worked with Graham on this in the past. Four hands music, I would say it presents three main challenges. The first is that you have to be on the same page with respect to cueing each other. Cueing is commonplace in all of music, really. If you're playing in an ensemble, there has to be somebody cueing you in. Usually with a large ensemble, that's a conductor. In a chamber ensemble, what you're doing is you're breathing, and that shows when you're about to start. The breath, the cueing breath, shows how fast the tempo is and what the characteristics of the music are. So if you breathe quickly, that shows that you're about to play something fast. If you breathe more gently, that will signify a slower tempo and usually a gentler attack. And so pianists, because we often play alone, don't have to think about cueing as often. And four hands forces us to be really clear with our cues, which brings me to the second challenge of four hands music. The piano has a very hard attack. You can't really use a soft attack with a piano. It's a percussion instrument, right? You play a note and it plays immediately. Even if you're playing softly, it's still a hard attack. And what this means is that in order to play four hands music effectively, you really have to be precise, because every moment where you do not align with your partner is communicated in the music. You can really hear when they aren't exactly together. And this is probably the hardest aspect of playing four hands music. So you want to be really on the same page. You want to be watching each other's hands if you can to hit the notes at the same time. And you want to be consistent with your rhythms and your tempo. It's hard to do if you haven't played with somebody before. Finally, four hands music, if you're a pianist and you're interested in trying this out, a word of advice for practicing the music. Normally, when you're playing at the piano, you're sitting in the center of the instrument, right? You want to have equal access to the high and the low ranges. When you're playing four hands, you're only occupying half the keyboard, right? You might be this part on or this part on. It's called either the primo or the secondo. And depending on which side you're on, you'll want to sit on that part of the bench and practice having that angle of attack on the piano. Because if you don't, you're going to find that a lot of your practicing goes down the tubes. If you practice something at one angle, and then when you have to actually play it with your partner, it's at a different angle, your proprioception will not be right. Everything will feel off. And even accounting for this in your practicing, it's very difficult to really prepare for how off it feels to play at this sideways angle. So that's another very difficult aspect of four hands music. And I was very proud to play music with Graham, as always, and proud to be playing some of his music as well as arrangements he's done. And you can see the results on YouTube. I ran into a real setback this past month that was very stressful, and I want to talk about it candidly, so as to kind of extract lessons learned from this episode and maybe pass on some advice for my younger self. Yeah, younger in this case being like 2 months ago. My younger self, but also for musicians that might have to deal with this in the future. So the schools that I was teaching at all began a winter break about halfway through the month, let's say December 15th ish. And work at the ballet slowed down around that time too. They took a break for the holiday that lasted about 2 weeks or so. And I knew this was coming, but I didn't really do anything to prepare for it. I just kind of made a mental note, around Christmas time, things are going to slow down. But around Christmas, musicians often have gigs, Christmas parties, events, Christmas themed things like the Christmas gig I just described at the church, a lot of church work. So I thought, well, it kind of picks up around that time for Christmas anyway, ish. Maybe it'll balance itself out. But then COVID hit and everything was canceled. And so I was left with, and I got COVID along with much of the rest of the world or the country around January 1st, which knocked me out of commission for a little while. And so I found myself in a position from about December 15th to January 15th or so, where I was not working. I was doing like a little bit of work, commissions stuff on my computer, but I was not really up to full speed. And I consider that sort of a lost time professionally. It was, and the problem was, there are a couple issues. First off, it was a little bit of a perfect storm situation where, COVID hit and gigs dried up as a result. But a lot of this was just me not planning ahead. I was sort of giving lip service, I guess, to the idea that the end of December, beginning of January was going to be slow. But I wasn't saving up properly for that. And I wasn't planning my freelance work in any sort of way to compensate for that financial hit. So I took a huge hit, a couple thousand, I think, by not really working between those days. And I'm suffering now as a result, because one of the hidden dirty secrets about adulthood is when you do work, you don't really see the dividends of that work until like a week or two later when your paycheck comes in. If it's getting mailed to you or if it's getting deposited into your account or whatever, you always have to be thinking, okay, I'm doing this work so that I will be paid in 2 weeks. And so the hardship of that month wasn't really felt properly during that month. I'm feeling it now. And I can tell you now I'm kicking myself for not preparing for that. So the moral of this story for any musician, any freelancer really, is don't get complacent. If you're finding that you're not working, or better yet, if you think you won't be working in the near future, make plans, right? Prepare for that. A credit card is not a plan. More gigs is a plan. Or if you have to, a temporary job is a plan. My plan was, I get to watch more TV and maybe write some hobby music. That is not a plan. So lesson learned, that can't happen again this next year. That could be a severe problem for me if I suddenly have to pay rent and I don't have the money to pay the rent, right? You have to be prepared for those moments. During this time, when I was not working a bunch, I did produce a hobby project that I love. And this was the song, It's Not Gonna Kill You. And I'm smiling because, it's really important not to lose the spark. And so one of the, and this is kind of philosophical, I guess, one of the hazards of doing something that you love for a living is that you might not love it so much after a while. You might get sick of it, or you might, the worst case scenario is it might suck the joy out of the thing that you originally loved because you're trying to be more professional and you're trying to make compromises so as to do it for a living. And I do feel the stress of that sometimes. I think especially with teaching, for me, if I take on too many students, I find that I become a much more tired teacher. You know, it's like I get to this mental state where I'm not bringing my full game to lessons. And so I'm very reluctant to take on too many students. I want to really, you know, have quality over quantity. And that this can happen with creating new music or with playing music. And one of my, I guess my strategy for avoiding that is to always have hobby projects that are, they represent kind of the core of my artistic interests. They are adventurous or experimental, or they're the kind of things that are on my bucket list. And in December, one of the good, you know, silver linings of that dry spell was I created this song, literally a song that I sang called "It's Not Gonna Kill You." And I'm not a singer. And one of the sweet side effects of sharing work like this with your friends is everybody's very eager to tell you, oh, you have a great voice, and good job, and wow, you know. And it's all, you know, I love the love. Thank you so much for telling me that, and thank you for listening. But to be real, I know that I am not a professional singer, right? You can listen to this song that I wrote and performed, and you can hear, okay, it's like a little flat in some places. And like, you know, I haven't taken voice lessons. I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but it's on pitch, right? I know how to sing on pitch, and it's fine. And I think it's very important to occasionally do things like this where you're not comfortable, you don't know exactly what you're doing, but it's something that you want to do, right? I've always wanted to do this, to write a song, sing it, perform it, and have it communicate something that's personally important to me. And this song did that. It's a song about the experience that we've all had of having some kind of social fear or a social anxiety around a situation that's not actually physically dangerous to you, such as public speaking, or you know, talking to a stranger, or at one point in the song, I even referenced singing a song, you know, like karaoke, for example. It's just life is filled with these situations where we experience, oh dear, you know, we have this physiological reaction. Oh dear, I'm about to perform on stage or something. But like, there's no actual danger there, right? Nothing you're going to do on stage or say to this person is going to be actually dangerous to you. And so that's what this song was about. And I'm really glad that I made it. Yeah, always make time for these things, I think, if you can. I guess not everybody can, but don't lose the spark, right? If you're getting into music, don't lose the reason you got into music. Look in your heart, right? Remember what you loved as a kid. Do that. You don't have to do it all the time. Just make sure occasionally do that. Treat yourself. I think that's good advice. This past, or the end of this past month, going into this month and next month, I took on a job as a substitute pianist for a church, Trinity Church in Austin. And it's been great. I've loved working with Tim, the music director there, and they are a very sweet congregation filled with very nice people, and I really enjoy doing church work. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I approach this kind of work, kind of my evolving, I don't know, strategies towards it, and also how I create piano recordings. So working for Trinity, subbing around in this area, and working for Orchard Covenant Church for a couple years, working for Union Chapel back in 2011 through 2014, I think it was. I'm often put in a position where I need to improvise some music for a prelude or a postlude or for communion. And my strategies towards this have evolved a little bit. At Orchard Covenant Church, I was very, looking back on it, very ambitious with my preludes and my postludes. I really just kind of let loose, in many of these cases, and played music with a lot of variety and color and melodic development. And I was very proud of these improvisations. And if you want to hear them, you can find them on my website. And I was always encouraged to do this by the pastor, the various people at the church who enjoyed the preludes, especially. And so it was really all green lights to have full creative expression in this context. And first off, I'm really grateful that I had that experience for a couple of years of just kind of, spreading my wings there and feeling welcomed to do so. That being said, I've come to realize that that is not the norm. Normally, you don't want like a flashy prelude for a church service. You want something that's more in the background, something that's more accompanimental. It puts you in a worshipful state. And although I loved doing this at OCC, and I heard a lot of positive feedback from these preludes and postludes, I did eventually suss out some people who said, well, we loved, the music. It was really cool, but it sometimes felt too distracting. It was like I wanted to come to church and I didn't want to be distracted by a musical performance. I wanted to be put into a meditative state. And I personally wanted to be more in a meditative state. And, it was all good. I didn't want to complain, but it would have been nice sometimes if it was a little less attention grabbing. And so when I heard that feedback, I realized that this was something of a chronic problem for me. I would write music for media that had the same problem. It would be too flashy. It would have too much variety and rhythmic changes, and it would sometimes be a little too avant-garde. I just basically I was so enthusiastic. It's a very sweet problem, really, when you think about it. I loved writing and improvising so much, and I wanted to express myself so deeply that I kind of had this problem of over-enthusiasm. The music just drew too much attention to itself in these contexts, I think, broadly speaking. And so I've learned a couple of strategies to avoid this while maintaining, I think, some, creative integrity, some freedom to experiment in a more limited frame. So the first is, and this is general advice for anybody improvising in a church, improvising music as background music for any kind of situation. The first is to use 4-bar phrases. And this is a simple piece of advice, but it's not always as easy to follow as you might think. Sometimes music really wants to break out of 4-bar phrases. And sometimes you can, of course, let it. But if you're in the background, 4-bar phrases is a really great way to keep your music more in the background, because 4-bar phrases feel symmetrical and they feel more predictable. It doesn't mean they can't be beautiful or even profound. Chopin famously wrote largely in 4-bar phrases. If you listen to Chopin, a lot of his music is it kind of works in the background, right? It doesn't mean it's not profound or beautiful. Right? He was one of the greatest composers ever, probably. But following 4-bar phrases, trying to coax things into 4-bar phrases, even when they don't want to be, is a great way to stay in the background. Another, watch your dynamics. Now, usually when you're performing, watching your dynamics means bring out the dynamics, make your softs really soft, make your louds exciting. And yeah, when you're performing, that's the mindset you want to be in. When you're in the background, your dynamics should not be surprising. They should not be sudden or subito. They should be gradual changes, and the changes should be within this frame rather than this frame. And looking back at OCC, I think one of the reasons I was occasionally, I don't want to say alienating, but occasionally distracting members of the congregation with my preludes and postludes is because my dynamics were here or here, and they really needed to be here, at least in most situations. For most churches, they need to be about here. And this is also, just as a side tangent, this is the problem with classical music in the car. If you listen to classical music in the car, what you'll find is that, unless you have an electric car, which I presume is much quieter, the sound of the engine and also the sound of the road drowns out most of the soft sections. So unless you're fiddling with your volume knob, which I don't recommend, you're going to be suddenly ambushed by moments of loud phrases, and then you can't hear anything. So it's like the irony is classical music is often often marketed as being relaxing, but it's much less relaxing intrinsically, I think, than most of the music you hear on the radio, because its dynamic contrast is way greater than most popular music, which is a great thing if you're in a concert hall and everybody's sitting quietly and there's no distraction. But if you're in a car, what you want is compressed audio. You want audio that is more consistent, stays within a smaller range. And so if you're hired to create background music, keep this in mind. Don't suddenly have a spike in your volume, right? Keep the music within a more controlled range. And this will signify, it will communicate that it's supposed to be in the background, right? And it makes it easier to hear in the car, in a gymnasium, in auditoriums where people are milling around and there's background music. I'm trying to think of all these situations where I've been hired to play in the background. That's what you want. You want a consistent sound. When I'm creating piano recordings, as I have for this, for Trinity Church recently, they had to go remote, as a lot of churches have because of COVID. And they hired me to create some music for their online services. The way I create recordings is I use this piano rather than this piano. So I use an electric piano, and it's plugged into my computer using a MIDI to USB cord, which looks like this. I'll see if I can get this up. Looks like this. It's the same kind of jack that you, can I get that right? Here we go. It's the same kind of jack that you would use for a printer. Okay. And what I do is I set Cubase going. Cubase is a digital audio workstation, which is basically a fancy word meaning this is software where you make audio. And you can also manipulate MIDI data. And that's why I use this cord. It records the piano as MIDI data. And the reason this is so useful is because you can manipulate MIDI data in any way you want. You can fix notes, you can change the tempo, you can change the instrument. MIDI data is just like a piano roll. It's very versatile. Now, it's not organic. It's digital information. It doesn't feel like acoustic. So it's not going to be as real or gritty as recording on this piano. No, but the trade-off is well worth it. If you're recording music, I highly recommend getting a keyboard, getting a cord like this, and getting a digital audio workstation where you can record MIDI data. And then what I recommend is getting a good piano sound. The sound that I have used for about 2 years is Alicia's Keys, which is adorably by Alicia Keys. And it sounds pretty good. It's a pretty good piano sound. It's a VST that you can use with the free Contact player. It's pretty cheap. I think it was only like $100, 150, something like that. And it's served me really well. And so I record the MIDI data. I record it slowly. I have a metronome going at like 60 beats per minute, and I record in slow motion, and it gets it really, really accurate. Even when I'm improvising, I do this. It records the information really accurately. It goes into the computer. I use Alicia's Keys to render the sound, and then I turn the tempo to whatever I want it to be. And that's how I make piano recordings. That's how I've done it for about 2 years now. And I highly recommend this process to anybody who is put in the position of having to create piano recordings from home, because it's way, it doesn't sound easier. I promise it is way easier in the long run than recording from an acoustic instrument. If you're recording from an acoustic instrument and then the client says, oh man, it's a little too fast, well, you have to re-record it. You have to make it all over again. And you don't have the same control. So I recommend this approach. I just had a film released, kind of. I had a trailer released that I did music for. Back in 2012, I did this music for an animation called The Muffin Man. Now, heads up, if there are any parents listening to this, The Muffin Man is not child friendly. It's a mature audiences thing only. So please don't watch this with your kids. The Muffin Man was a horror animation about a creepy Muffin Man character that lives off of eating children. He turns children into muffins, and then he eats the muffins, and that's how he stays young. And you can think of it as being a lot like The Picture of Dorian Gray for Oscar Wilde fans. It's like a twisted fairy tale story. Probably not dissimilar to the Grimm's fairy tales as they were in their original macabre form. Anyway, so I did this animation in 2012, and then Seth went on to his own career and did other video things for a while. And then last year, he approached me and said, listen, I'm doing it again. I'm going to try and remake this kind of scrappy animation into a more professional project. I'm going to try and make a series out of it. And I was like, all right, let's do this. So for a little while, I worked with him making music for the trailer for this series called The Muffin Man. Scoring for animation. Animation, it seems like when I write music for animation, things are happening faster than in film. And that might not be true all the time, but just in my experience, animation is more zany. It's more high energy. And it's probably my favorite thing to do in the whole world is score for animation, because you can never get bored. If you want to see the history of this, go watch those old Chuck Jones cartoons, because the music in those old cartoons is just incredible. Like there's something happening in every second of a Tom and Jerry cartoon, musically speaking. And it's very sophisticated. There's a lot of classical music and historical references in these old cartoon soundtracks. So I highly recommend them. So whether it's because of this tradition or whether it's just the nature of animation, scoring for animation, if you're going to start doing that, requires you to be doing what's called Mickey Mousing, which is when you match the music to the audio, match the music to the visual on the screen very closely. You know, a character runs up the stairs and you have a xylophone going up the stairs. The Muffin Man was an example of this. It was music that was closely tied to the action. Not as much as the old Tom and Jerry cartoons, certainly, but more so than probably with most films, I guess. Certainly more than the short films I've scored. And as for finding clients and networking, I don't know, man. I'm still not great at this. I want to do more of this kind of work. I want to enter this industry. And I've been kind of flirting with this for like a decade, where I've been doing the odd project here and there. And I've heard all sorts of different strategies for this, you know, and I think that, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I think the reason I've had not a lot of chances to participate in this is because I've been afraid to put myself out there. I am very shy when I'm around filmmakers and animators and creative people like this. I just become very starstruck. I really admire people who are in this field, or I admire something about it where it makes me nervous. You know, I'm like, oh, I start to get self-deprecating. Oh, I haven't done that much stuff. Oh, yeah, it's nothing, whatever. And this is not the frame of mind you want to be in if you're putting yourself out there, if you're networking. So I'm trying to get better at this. I'm trying to be more bold, more self-advocating in this way. And honestly, these videos are part of that. I'm trying to be less shy about what I'm doing. But for what it's worth, this does not come easily to me. I struggle with projecting confidence and with salesmanship and all that stuff. I'm much more comfortable just asking them questions. And if you look at my website, you'll see I did these interviews with composers and animators and other creative people. I am way more comfortable in that mindset of just asking them, hey, how do you do what you do? You know, teach me, than I am in the mindset of selling myself. So the networking thing is a work in progress. Call it another New Year's resolution. I hope to get much better at this in the future. But the clients I have had have all been friend of a friend, or situations where you know, they saw my music online and they reached out to me. That happens sometimes, not as often as I would like, but it does happen. And I think that's how I got in touch with Seth, actually. I put some music online and he found me on Newgrounds and reached out to me and said, hey, I'm looking for somebody for this project back in 2012. And yeah, so I don't have a lot of advice for young musicians on this. All I can say is it doesn't hurt to reach out to people. And it's probably better to be a little bit annoying and get yourself out there than it is to be totally self-withdrawn. And I'm trying to take that lesson for myself as well. On that note, I put out a demo reel recently. This was a demo reel is a combination of different work. It's like a montage of excerpts from work that you did in a certain time period. And for composers, this means taking audio usually from the last year and excerpting little bits and pieces of it and stringing it together into an audio file that you can send to people. And I tried to do a couple of things in my 2021 demo reel. And being sort of new to this, to making demo reels, I don't know if this is the best advice ever, but what I found putting this together was I wanted it to feel like a listenable experience, first off. So I didn't want it to be too long. I'm kind of worried about the one I made being a little too long as it is. I think it's about 7 minutes. I've seen longer, I've seen shorter. You don't want it to be too long because you're giving it to somebody who might not have a ton of time to listen to the whole thing. So length matters. The first track matters a lot. I think you want the first track to really be like, this is me. This is my style. This is a summary of my artistic interest. And so for me, I chose a chiptune track, a video game track, because I love writing chiptune music, and you can hear how much I love it in the music that I write for that style. Those of you watching that don't know what a chiptune is, it's basically an old school retro arcade style aesthetic, where you have a lot of synthesizers and you have a kind of scrappy, sketchy Nintendo, old style Nintendo or Atari sound. And I happen to just love this music. It's what I grew up with. It's nostalgic for me. And when I write music in that vein, again, you can just kind of hear that I'm having a great time, I think. So I started off with a track like that, but then I moved straight from that to an orchestral track because I also want people to know, hey, I also write orchestral music. My background is also classical. And then I went from there with projects from the last year. That's on my website. My plan for this next month. I'm headed into UIL season, and UIL for non-Texans is a how do you describe it? Not a festival. It's a style of grading different ensembles and students in schools for their accomplishments, basically. And it extends to middle schools and high schools. And what it appears to be is like this is my first year doing it. It's like a self-evaluation tool where an ensemble will perform for a couple of judges. Like let's say a sixth grade choir will perform for some judges. Then the judges give them a score of 1 through 5, I think it is. And they're not competing with other ensembles. They're just competing with last year. And so they're trying to do a little better than they did last year. And the same with students. An individual student will perform for judges in a UIL context, and the judge will give them a score 1 through 5, to evaluate how prepared they were for that. And for UIL, they hire a bunch of accompanists to make this happen. Students need accompanists, ensembles need accompanists. And so February is going to be a busier month for me because I have some UIL stuff coming up. A couple of notes on this. I made one mistake when I was preparing for UIL. And this was also kind of a rookie mistake, and I can really give you a clear lesson learned from this. If you are booking time with somebody in advance, if you're saying you need me for a concert, let's book the concert and the rehearsal or a couple of rehearsals. If you're booking time, be specific and don't nail down the time until it's specific. I made a big mistake, I think, maybe not a big mistake, a mistake by saying to one teacher, when would you like to rehearse? And he said, well, can you block off all the mornings of this week? So when a potential client asks you that question, the answer is no. No, I can't block off an entire week of mornings just because I don't happen to have anything on those mornings yet, just because you might need me for that week, right? Turns out he really only needed me for 2 days, but I gave him the whole week just in case. And so after I told him, sure, I can block off that week, I don't have anything on those mornings, I was then approached by some other people who wanted to know if I had any time that week. And my answer had to be, I don't know. I blocked off all my mornings. Don't handle scheduling this way. When this happens, when somebody asks you if you have time over a long range, what you do is you say, yes, these are my current availabilities. They are subject to change. Here's when I'm available on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. These are my free hours as of right now. I'm not booking any of this time until I can book the time, right? I'm not putting in a tentative booking. I'm only going to give you a time once you settle on a time, okay? And this is for my protection because it means that I don't accidentally book an entire week like this for something that really only needed 2 days. So I could have taken on more work, but I didn't as a result of booking off this crucial week a little too liberally, a little too freely. And so that's something I'm going to take with me to next year. But, you know, silver lining to this, I did want to be conservative this first year with UIL on how much work I took on. I didn't want to take on too much. Better to take on a little too little and do a good job than to risk overdoing it this first time around. So this takes me to another topic I wanted to cover, which is how do you learn a lot of music? And also how do you read through a lot of music? So this section is geared towards accompanists and pianists. If you want to learn a lot of music, you have to be comfortable with reading a lot of music. And this means, in the case of pianists, this means taking on a lot of information, unfortunately. The first thing to recognize about reading piano music is you have 2 staffs instead of just 1. And this means that you're taking on twice as much information as the normal instrumentalist or singer. And in fact, it's probably much more than that because you don't just have a single line on each staff. You have chords, you have the soloist's part to worry about if you're accompanying somebody. So it's kind of like 3 staffs. It's a lot to take in. And so it can seem like an impossible task when you have to learn things, when you have to learn 20 pieces by next week, right? How on earth can somebody do that? Well, there are ways of making that happen. What you do first off is you try and get really good at reading music by sight. And this is where the pianist is at a different disadvantage. Most instruments, when you're playing them, you don't have to look at the instrument to play it. You can play it by feel. If you're playing a clarinet, for example, this is your posture. Or how's it? There we go. That webcam. This is your posture, right? And you can read by looking at it. Common sense. You don't have to be looking at your fingers to play the clarinet. On piano, it really, really helps if you can look at your fingers. That's really why pianists memorize their music a lot of the time at performances, because then they can look at their hands and their accuracy goes way up. The thing is, if you're learning a lot of music and you're reading a lot of stuff that you haven't played a lot, you can't really be doing that. Because if you're always looking down and up and down and up at your hands and at the page, you lose where you were. It's very easy to lose your place because you're not familiar with the music yet. So the real secret to sight reading at the piano is learning to not look at your hands and learning to play by feel. It's difficult. It was a challenge for me, certainly, but you can get really good at this. What you do is you just lock your eyes on where you are and you basically accept that you will be less accurate than if you knew this music better because you're not looking at your hands and you're relying on your proprioception to find your notes. There are some exceptions. If you're making a big leap, you usually want to look down for the leap because that's when your accuracy really plummets off a cliff. when you're going boom, 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 boom. It's really hard to do that without looking. But if you have to sight read, if you have to learn a lot of music, that's the trick. Don't look at your hands. The other big trick that I would give for people in a classical context is to recognize that classical music has rubato and allows for rubato. And in those moments where you really, really, really can't play something in time because it's sort of new, because it's very difficult, because you can't look down at your hands at that moment, it is sometimes acceptable to take a little bit of time, right? Rather than play it poorly, you can play it well, but a little bit slower for that 1 second. That's just the reality of classical accompaniment. You can't do that in all contexts. And it's important to get a feel for where it's appropriate, where the soloist will wait for you, where it feels like an interpretive choice, frankly, versus the moments where it's like, no, you got to play this in time. Sorry, like, don't slow down here. And also, if you do slow down in one section, it's important to compensate for that, to have this sense of push and pull by pushing ahead a little bit, maybe in the next section or in another part of the piece. So finding those moments when you're accompanying can be a great help if you don't know the music that well yet. It helps you play it more accurately because you're being a little bit more forgiving with yourself with the time. And again, this is mostly a classical thing. Classical music is less metronomic than other genres, frankly. You can't do this in jazz. But in jazz, if you play a wrong note, it's only one note away from being the right note. You can always find a way of making it sound as if what you played was exactly what you intended. Okay, so that's going to do it for me on this video. I hope it was useful to somebody. It's a slightly different format than what I've done in the past. Let me know what you think about this format, whether it was useful or whether it was not useful. Maybe it was boring. I don't know, but I wish you well and happy music making. And I'll check in probably with another video next month to let you know how things went with UIL. Take care.